Hello everyone and welcome back to the Mysidian Legend. My name is Alex Scott and today we're going to talk again about some local results that I had. I ended up playing the mono water deck that I talked about last week, so I won't go super in depth into the deck this week, but I will talk a little bit more about some of the spoilers that we've been seeing, and there's a particular theme to the spoilers that I'm going to be talking about. But before we get into that, I just want to catch you up on some podcast news. So I've been messing around with this podcast format. After the first podcast, my brother told me, well, hey, you should have some transitions between your different segments and your different ideas. And I thought, wow, that sounds really good, and we could put music to it, etc. So last week I totally announced all my segments and I put some music on, and the feedback that I got was that music is good and that the segment announcements were bad. So this week it's going to be a little more natural, I hope. I mean, to be honest, it's only 3 episodes in, so I'm not exactly super used to talking on mic, so it's something that I'll just get more practice at. These first few episodes are all to just get practice for me to try and kind of learn how to edit podcasts, to learn how to record them, and I'm not really advertising this. I am uploading to YouTube. I am putting it on that podcast site, but I'm not looking to like mass advertise this yet. I just need to get feedback. So that being said, if you have feedback for me, then you can comment on the video and you can shoot me a message on Facebook, and I'm really open to feedback, and don't be afraid of offending me. I would love to hear what things you would like to see in this podcast and quality of life things I can do for the podcast, or even just content that you want to see on the podcast. So let me know about that, and we'll talk about the spoilers next. So I have 5 spoilers here to talk about, and the theme that they all share is card draw. So there's been some elements in this game that have gotten a lot of card draw or some just really good searching, and those elements are water and wind. So wind has insanely good searching packages. They have a ton of backup searching packages, which is very, very important specifically for wind, but also just in general. If you can set up your backups consistently, then you can just start playing the game, and you can start to just generate a lot more value than your opponent if they have to pitch more cards to play their cards. So elements like fire, earth, lightning, and ice hadn't seen a lot of card draw elements. Ice has recently seen more with the Scholar backup, and then the Azure Dragon that just is able to draw you a ton of cards. But a lot of decks they needed something really strong to kind of mitigate that. And with Mono Lightning, it was lots of removal and haste and efficient forwards, but it was hard otherwise to kind of keep up with your opponents and the value that they were getting. Fire's always had that issue as well, and similar. Earth is in actually a very similar position, and funny thing is, Earth might actually be becoming the weak element in the next set if fire keeps on trending upwards, but we'll see how that goes. I mean, the recent fire deck results that we've seen that have been so positive were in 2 deck tournaments, so it's hard to say if a lot of those decks would have seen play if it was a 1 deck tournament where people would probably have brought fire ice but maybe not mono fire, because not every matchup is going to be favorable for it. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about Ignacio and Geomancer for the fire cards. Ignacio is a 5-cost fire forward. He is category Brave Exvius. He is a hero and he's got 9,000 power. So when Ignacio deals damage to your opponent or forward, draw 1 card. Discard 1 fire card. Ignacio gains 2,000 power until the end of turn. So this is kind of similar to Azure Dragon, except Azure Dragon is an EX burst, and Ignacio actually has to deal damage to something, but it's a pretty foregone conclusion that he's going to, because it's your opponent or a forward. So if they don't block, he'll deal damage and you'll draw a card, and if they do block, he'll deal damage to that forward and you'll draw a card. So the important thing is making sure he survives, and he has that action ability to ensure that, but he also has you are in fire, so you have both Belias, so you also have probably some boosters like Lebro, or maybe even Elise, etc. So there's different ways to boost this guy, and I don't think you're really going to get outpowered that much. You're not going to be trading him into things. It's more dealing with removal like Diabolos. So we've already seen that cards like this are pretty powerful. Cards like Barret and Azure Dragon, but those have EX bursts. So Fire is kind of out of luck here. It's really going to come down to if he can stick, and if he does stick, then man, is he going to get you a lot of value. So Geomancer has the text: when Geomancer enters the field, reveal the top card of your deck. If it's a fire card, add it to your hand. So Geomancer, I should have mentioned, is a 3 CP fire backup, category 3. He's a standard unit, so you can play multiple ones, and he's also got an action ability to put himself in the break zone and deal 2k to a forward. And that's kind of neat. It's unconditional. You just get to deal at 2k, so it pops in a Lua shield. You don't have to worry about active or dull. It's just going to kind of add on to some of the ping effects that you already have. If you play a Furion, if you play a VV, or any sort of ping effect, then you can just tack on Geomancer, which is pretty awesome. So this card is very, very strong. Obviously, it's important to play it in mono fire, but it says fire card, not character. So that means it draws summons. It literally will draw 100% of the time when you play it in mono fire. So this is similar to playing a searcher, where you play a 3 CP searcher and you're searching a card in your deck, and it's like you played a 1 CP backup because you replaced the card that you've pitched for Geomancer, or for whatever the searcher was. So this is kind of a similar effect, except that it can just dig for anything. It's always going to be able, as long as you have cards in your deck, you are able to draw something with this if you're playing mono fire. So I think that this is really cool that Fire is getting some card draw. I think that's what it needs to compete, and I'm excited to see how this is going to go with these 2 cards making their way into mono fire. The next card I wanted to talk about, so last week I talked about Zusu Hisa for Earth, and this week I'm going to talk about Kusith. So this is a 2 CP summon, EX burst. Choose 1 forward or backup in your break zone and add it to your hand. And this is not the best value, although off of an EX burst it's obviously really good, but the kind of theme in this set is that every single element is getting a cantrip type summon that's like a cheap summon that cycles. It draws a card, so you're still losing CP if you or at like the very least you're kind of like netting the cards in your hand, but at the same time whatever CP you use to cast this is actually going to cost you. Even if it was backup CP, you're still spending CP. That CP could have been used proactively to do something else. So it's not a true like net card, but playing it off backups isn't going to be bad. I think that this card is really cool because you can recur things super easily by surprise for specials. So things like Cecil's Dark, that the only cost for the special is another Cecil. You don't have to worry about any sort of CP. You can just switch a Kusith in your hand for a Cecil and cast a Dark and kind of surprise people, which is going to be kind of neat. I mean, I suppose you could have had a Cecil to begin with, so your opponent might not, they would have been expecting it, but it does give you that option to pitch those cards early and then get them back. And in a game where Luminous Puma is seeing plenty of play, then I don't think that's a huge deal that we have another recursion card in Earth. And the reason I think that it's worth talking about is because Earth doesn't have a lot of card draw, and this is kind of pseudo card draw. If you're playing this in Earth, maybe you're able to EX burst it and get a card back from your break zone, and that's really good. We've seen that the FF7 Earth Fire deck is just like a whole slew of EX bursts. It's like 35 EX bursts because you can't have enough. And a lot of those EX bursts, like some of them are pingy damage ones like Cloud and Black Waltz and stuff, but then there's just like a ton of recursion. So there's like what's Barrett's daughter's name, Marley or something like that. I should know that. She just like recurs your card. So I mean, this is the same thing, except it doesn't have to be an FF7 card. This can just recur you anything. So I mean, it might just be the boost that Mono Earth needs. Otherwise, Earth is gonna see some dark days ahead. So the next card I'm going to talk about is in Ice, and it's Bard, which is a 2 CP backup, category 3. It's multiplayable. It's a standard unit. When Bard enters the field, if your opponent has no cards in his or her hand, draw 1 card. So that's pretty neat. Being able to just play this backup and draw 1 card, so it replaces itself in your hand, and it's going to then start generating CP for you, which is the main difference between something like a forward or a backup compared to Kusith, the summon we were just talking about, is that they represent something on the board, and that's why they really do gain more of an advantage than something like a summon that just replaces itself because of that CP spent that we talked about. So this is a thematically very cool card because Ice is all about making people discard and making them flip tables and curse your name. So by having a card that capitalizes on your opponent having no cards in hand, that's kind of very cool for Ice. Now, that scares me. If this was around in the turbo discard days, this would be terrifying. It's a little less scary now, but I'm just happy to see that elements are getting kind of like on theme card draw. So Bard, Ignacio was a really cool one for fire that, you know, you're dealing damage. Well, that's something that fire does. So that was a really cool on theme card draw. Geomancer was just like a obligatory card draw and didn't make as much sense, but it's still something that fire needed. And this next one, which is Sakura, is again going to be some really cool flavorful card draw. So Sakura is a Brave Exvius forward, 2 CP, lightning, 5,000 power. So when Sakura enters the field, if your opponent controls a damaged forward, draw 2 cards. That is pretty unreal. So she's going to be even better than these other cards in that she draws you 2 cards. So if you pitched a card to play her, you're getting a forward and you're adding 2 cards back to your hand. So you ended up just getting this 5k body, which is pretty neat. If you play her off backups, then you've lost 1 card from hand and you've put 2 cards back into your hand. Now, the reason that she's 2 cards and the other ones are all 1 card is because damaging a forward is actually a lot trickier than it sounds. You need to set that up, and that's going to require a CP investment. Now, you can also follow that up because lightning has a lot of ways to ping things, but it also has a lot of other effects that deal with damaged forwards. So you could follow up with an Onion Knight, but that's going to be kind of more of like a best case scenario. That's going to be a really hard combo because then you have your ping, you play your Sakura, you draw 2 cards, then you have to play your Onion Knight, and yes, you might have the CP to do that all, but before you can have the CP to play the cards, you actually have to have the cards in your hand. So I think that there might be times where you have to damage a forward just so you can draw a Sakura, and you might not have a follow-up. But there are some ways to damage cards in Lightning that aren't too bad. If you're in kind of a late game, you might be able to just use Alpha Node's 1 Lightning tap to ping something for 2k and then play a Sakura and draw some cards and have a kind of a catch-up turn. Or you might be able to use certain forwards action or auto abilities to ping on swing or just by dulling, and then you can follow up with drawing some cards. So that could actually be kind of cool in like a Wind Lightning deck, because Wind has a lot of very cheap ways to ping forwards, and then Lightning has lots of ways to capitalize on pinged forwards, like Sakura. Now we have Orlando to break a forward, the Black Mage backup to break a forward, although you're likely not going to use that, but you have things like Onion Knight, and you just have other pings that will combo with that. So if you're playing a Lightning Wind deck and you're able to drop a Cactuar and just ping with it and then play Sakura, then you're really easily able to just draw cards really quickly. And if you're playing that element combination, then you can actually be a pretty fast deck, and maybe this is just how you're going to refill your hand. Okay, so next we're going to talk about my locals week, and before we can get into the matches, I just need to talk about how my my deck changed, and it's a pretty small change this week. Okay, so last week I was talking about changing my deck up a little bit, and the main thing that I wanted to do was add some backup consistency. So I did a few things to try to shake up the deck a bit. The first thing I did was I added another Brawn to the deck list, and in order to do that, I had to cut a card that I honestly can't think of right now, and it's really, ticking me off. But I did also cut one Viking, and the reason I went to 2 Vikings and 3 Laylas because I'm playing that third Brawn. I would be able to find Vikings as soon as possible with Brawn and then pitch them so that Laylas will be online for later on. The card that I cut was Cloud of Darkness, the 5 CP. I thought, well, I have a name clash, I have lots of 5-cost forwards, I can cut that. So I cut a Cloud of Darkness, and I cut a Viking, and I added a Brawn, and I also added a 4 CP Steiner. And the reason I added that 4 CP Steiner Legend was because it goes online very quickly at 3 damage. He lets you draw a card, making him kind of a pseudo 2 drop 8k. And I wanted to have more big forwards to contest the board, especially in a position where I had to play a 2 CP 8k because I've already taken 3 damage. And I just thought that I had a lot of weak forwards and that this forward might help me out. So with those 2 changes made, last Thursday I went into Magic Stronghold here in Vancouver, Canada, and I played a little FFTCG. Okay, so at Magic Stronghold this week, we were able to have 4 rounds of play. So I'm going to talk about each of those right now. My first round was against Mono Wind, which was kind of a bummer because it's my toughest matchup, like I was talking about last week. But I wanted to try and just get aggressive with this one, and that's what I ended up doing. So I opened up 2 backups and unfortunately had to kind of waste a CP and tap 1 and discard for Brawn the next turn. My opponent fairly routinely opened 2 backups, went into Echo to get into a big advantage card-wise because they went second and weren't floating any CP, so they were super efficient. They ended up playing a 3 CP no-no, which was a huge turn for me because I kind of applied a lot of pressure early, and in order to keep up, they had to play more cards out, and playing that 3 CP no-no was great because that cost them 1 extra card from hand because it's kind of it doesn't return on your investment right away. So the biggest thing in this match is that I just couldn't draw a 2 CP unit to reduce my summons, but I got out really fast. I got Cloud of Darkness out, and it was just totally getting in damage, and I was able to get my opponent to 6 damage. I also fought through 2 Yuris, so they played a Yuri, and as soon as that Yuri sticks, I am boned because they've got Yuri and No-No, and they can start to get some really messy stuff happening with Yuri activations. So I got through 1 Yuri, which is hard to do. 4 CP 8k forward is hard to remove for mono water. And then I got through a 2nd Yuri, and then the 3rd Yuri dropped with a Y'shtola. I was able to get rid of the Y'shtola that was protecting it, and then a 2nd Y'shtola dropped, and I could get rid of that, but I couldn't get rid of the Yuri, and so that one finally stuck, and he was able to stabilize and just kind of wait till I milled out, and Cloud of Darkness was a factor in me milling out today. So it was a pretty It was a frustrating match because I knew that this was a bad matchup and I wanted to win it so badly. And I really thought I played the matchup fairly well, dealing with a lot of different threats and trying to close it out quickly. But one of the biggest factors was I just couldn't cast summons efficiently. I cast two or three Cuchulains, or I guess 2 Cuchulains and 3 Leviathans, as well as a few Famvrits, and all of those were for full cost because I just could never get that Una down. I never drew it, and until the very end, so I just wasn't able to get any value. There was a turn where I could have killed a Yuri if I had my Una, because it would have created a situation where my CP would have been enough to cast all the summons in my hand. So some other notes: Gestalian, or just Emperor Gestal, was able to clear Chelinka early, which provided me a backup, a lot of tempo, so I could keep swinging. And I just kind of got stuck when the Yuri and Nono combo went off, so that was unfortunate. My round 2 opponent was fearsome, and it was an awful experience for me because I had a bye. And I just hate buys, and I hate buys even more when you're kind of frustrated by your last match, because then you're just sitting there and thinking about it. But I honestly just don't like buys in general, because when I come out to play Final Fantasy trading card game, I'd like to play Final Fantasy trading card game. So that was kind of an unfortunate result of us having an odd number of players. In round 3, I played against a Wind Earth Vaughn deck that wanted to basically capitalize on the new 6 CP Vaughn that plays a 3 cost from 5 options in your deck. And so for this matchup, I didn't really know what it was going to be like, because we just haven't really seen this deck much besides what Alex Hancock was playing at Euros, but this was not the same deck as that. So I opened 2 backups, and I couldn't really get more backups than that, but I just played forwards, Layla Viking, etc., and applied a lot of pressure. At one point, I had a huge board, and my opponent had no choice but to Shantoto, but unfortunately for them, Cloud of Darkness and Viking say leave the field, so I was able to draw 2 cards off of that Shantoto and just get a ton of advantage and kind of cruise to the victory from there. In the final round, I played against Mono Fire, and this was a matchup that I was pretty pleased to see, but my opening hand was not pleased to see me, and I did something that I just need to stop doing. I opened a Una, 2 CP Una, which is great, but I opened 4 summons, and it was like a Famfrit, 2 Leviathans, and a Cuchulain, and I thought to myself, I don't want these summons. I'm going to have to pitch a lot of them for CP, and it's going to kill me later on. So I'm going to try to get a better hand. But what I should have done is just kept that Una, because getting an efficient opening, getting your best backup out, that's important. So I mulliganed, and my next hand was Lena, 5 CP Lena, Famfrit, Cloud of Darkness, which is dark card, Emperor Gestal, dark card, and Ultros, which is 5 CP. So I had literally no prospects there besides pitching for like a Cloud of Darkness on the first turn. I drew into a Porum, so I was able to pitch my Famfrit for Porum, but I still didn't have any backups, and I fell behind. My opponent saw me in trouble and overextended a little bit, playing a Xande and then another forward after the first turn they had played a Terra, and I was able to Gestall that Xande, which is really huge. They had Terra, Xande, and that new Final Fantasy 14 2CP 7K Brave forward. It's like the I can't remember his name right now. He's one of the generals from Final Fantasy 14. So I went behind in damage, and I was almost able to stabilize. It was actually a really fun game, but I ended up losing because of a 10k Heian that I just couldn't deal with. I couldn't remove it. I had 9k of reduction in my hand by playing a nickel, and then scholaring it and playing it again, but I just couldn't get to that 10K, and that would have been my comeback if I could. But that huge Heian, you got to give credit. It's brave. It's at 10K sitting, and it goes up to 11 or 12K when it attacks, and there was nothing I could do about that but chump block. So that kind of just pushed my the match into a loss. So I ended up going 2-2, or really I just won one match and then had a bye, so that doesn't really count, and then lost 2. And it was kind of frustrating because, one, I'm recording a podcast, and there's this pressure for my decks to do well, because there's the fear of who's going to listen if you're not going to win your matches and have these strong decks. But I do think the deck is pretty strong. It did so well in testing, and it's just one of those things. Like when you're playing best of one and you're playing locals, like you just don't know how things are going to go. Sometimes you're going to brick your opening hand, and you need to just kind of take that on the chin and keep playing. So I wish I could have done a little bit better with this deck, because I also don't want to play the same deck every week, because that's going to become pretty boring on this podcast. But at the same time, I wanted to find some success with this deck, so I'll have to play it around in some test sessions the next time we're all getting together at Magic Stronghold. So with all that said, there is a few changes that I would make, so we'll get into those next. So the only note that I have for this list is that I'm probably going to end up cutting the Emperor Gestalt just down to 1. It's not something that I always use to play Cloud Darkness, and I think the 4 dark cards was just clogging my hand, and at times it was just frustrating. So I think I'm going to cut down to 1 Emperor Gestalt, and when I do that, I might put another water backup in, or it might end up being a summon like Kukulane, either the 1 CP or the 4 CP. So that's something that I'm going to test around with, but likely the Emperor will go, and I'll just keep playing around with the rest. Okay, so that's going to be everything for me. I hope you enjoyed listening. Thank you so much for coming by. Make sure you check out my YouTube channel and like and subscribe for that kind of stuff, because that helps me out a ton. It helps me know that this is worth it, and helps me just kind of get some feedback on how everything's going. And if you need any FFTCG singles, make sure you go to cardsofevilise.com. They're just such a great company. James Lockwood, who's the owner of that company, will he hustles to get product out the same day or the next day that it's ordered every time, so that you get it as quickly as possible. And then finally, I always have to thank FF Decks, because they've just created this incredible website that we're all using all the time, and I just really appreciate that. So thanks to those guys as well. So that's it from me. My name is Alex Scott, and I'm signing off for the Mysidian Legend. We'll see you next week. Thanks. Goodbye. Thank you so much for watching. You can like and subscribe to support us further, and you can read the Mysidia Post articles at themysidiapost.com. You can also check out our Patreon if you want to support us more. And if you need FFTCG singles, then look no further than Cards of Evilise. They've got great deals and prices. Check them out. Finally, I'd like to thank FF Decks for creating the best website for creating your Final Fantasy trading card game decks. They've also got a Patreon, so make sure you go check them out. They work so hard for the community, so let's pay them back. See you next time.